All right. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are in the world. I'm Amanda Maltby. I am our International Admissions Officer here in the Graduate School. And we're going to host this Q&A session and kind of information session today about financials that are required for you to begin your study here at the University of Alabama. We have several people joining us today, so I'm going to let them each introduce yourself. I guess we can start with you, Charter.
Sure. My name is Charter Morris. I'm Director of International Student and Scholar Services. And Tron, would you like to introduce yourself? Oh, you're on mute.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tron Nguyen. I am the Associate Director of International Student and Scholar Services.
And hello, I'm Sharday Smith. I'm an International Student Advisor with International Student and Scholar Services.
And so a little bit about the format today. We will feel free to ask questions in the question and answer box as we go. We'll try to hold those to the end and answer them at that time. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Charter and his team.
Sure. Thank you very much. So I'm going to share screen now. Hopefully everybody can see my screen. We put together not very many slides, actually, just a few slides just to kind of go over finances. Where I want to come at this is just to kind of go over, like, there's the finances you need for your I-20 or your DS 2019 so you can get your visa. And then there's your actual expenses when you arrive at the university. And those can be two very different things and often are. So before we really get going with that, I just wanted to remind you, International Student and Scholar Services, we are here for visa support. We do provide a lot of programming and activities for international students, faculty, and staff here, as well as their families. We're a very large and welcoming group, and we love to have everybody participate. So if you will be bringing family with you, a spouse or children, know that they're welcome at all of our events. Our hours of operation are Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. until 4:45 p.m. We do not operate on Saturdays or Sundays, and we are located on campus in B.B. Comer Hall, which you will become very familiar with once you arrive to campus. You can find our website at international.ua.edu, and you'll find the Student and Scholar Services page linked very prominently at the top. That'll take you to this ISSS subsite. Our email address is international@ua.edu, and our phone number is right there. So getting into the costs. So remember that for those of you who have already obtained your I-20 or your DS 2019, you had to show a certain amount of funding to obtain those documents. And when you're doing that, what you're showing is, by our estimates, your 9 months of expenses for your academic year, for the academic expenses, and then 12 months of your living expenses, because you have to cover the summer months, even when study is not required. And so in the request form, you'll see it broken down. We have, on the tuition line, it's the cost of tuition for full-time study. For the international student fee, it's the $100 per semester student fee. The course and college fees is based on an estimate for the average course and college fees paid by a student here at the university, which that's really kind of determined by what college you're in and what courses you take. That can fluctuate. On our website, when you click on these links, it'll take you directly to the page where you can figure out the actual course and college fees that you might pay. We estimate out the international health insurance here, which is charged by the semester. In the fall semester, it includes just the 5 months of expenses between August 1 and December 31st. For the spring semester, it's January 1st through the summer months, including July, all the way to July 31st. That's why it's a higher charge in the summer or in the spring, because it has to cover the summer expenses. We have your standard books and supplies estimates of $400 per semester. And this is where we start getting into parts where it's a little less under our control, which is your housing costs. That will completely depend upon where you live. We base the housing costs on the average single room of a shared apartment space for the city of Tuscaloosa. For meals, we base it on the USDA guidelines for minimum expenses for an adult between the ages of 20 and 25 years old. That is the baseline or the median level costs for your groceries per month. And we benchmark that every summer. So this is based on what the US government estimates is the average monthly grocery costs. And then your personal expenses, that is built around the idea that you're going to have a cell phone and small transportation costs. So we've estimated that out. But again, these are just estimates. We put that there because the US government requires us to estimate the cost of living. And we have to baseline that somewhere. And so these are the estimates we do. And we have a full explanation of how we break all that down on our student expenses page here. You can go to that page and you can scroll down, and it explains line by line how we came up with these estimates. And whether that is a realistic estimate for you is really to be determined, because I don't know where you're going to choose to live and whether or not that's going to provide transportation for you, or if you'll have to purchase your own transportation, your own car, or if potentially you have to pay for taxi services or Uber or Lyft or something like that in order to get transportation around the city. I don't know if you maybe have like some special dietary needs where you have to have certain things that aren't readily available at the grocery stores, or if you can find them, they may be more expensive than you're used to paying. So all of these things, when we estimate this is just for government reference to say, this is what we think the cost should be. But at the same time, we realize that it may not cover everything. It may be a higher estimate than what you might actually experience. It may be a much lower estimate than what you might experience. So you really need to factor in those real world costs. And keep in mind, if you have a spouse, if you have children, these are more mouths to feed. These are more people to clothe. These are more people to shelter. You need bigger space. You have more needs. I have a family. Trong has a family. Sharday has a family. We all know that our children and family, they eat and they do require additional expenses. So if you have family coming with you, when we estimate $5,000 per dependent, F2 or J2 dependent, we do that knowing that you're going to add significant costs for insurance, for meals, for all the other expenses. So getting into your first big costs, what should you plan for? Well, you probably have already been looking at this. In fact, it's probably been one of the few things that you've really looked at beyond the visa application fees, which is your flight costs. And that is something we have no control over. Now, my wife, we lived in Central Asia, and going home to Central Asia, at some times we've been able to catch flights for $800 round trip, but more recently it's been about $2,200 round trip. Even in the off season, it's been close to $2,000 per person. And so that is a huge expense. And so if you are factoring in those costs, just be aware there might not be much control that you have over those costs. You may have to look at flights. Just keep in mind, you're allowed to enter the US up to 30 days prior to the report date listed on your I-20 or DS 2019. So that gives you a little wiggle room at the front end to arrive early. But when you're making those plans, if you are able to get a cheaper flight, maybe coming in a little bit earlier, keep in mind you can't really arrive later. Classes will start on August 23rd, and the last day of registration and the last day that you're allowed to be here is up to a week after the start of classes, which is August 30th. That's really a hard deadline. So when you're making these plans, just remember, like, you might find a cheaper flight in September, but it's going to be too late. You really need to be here on time, even if it costs you more. And high cost for your flights is not a good or acceptable reason for arriving late for classes. But on the other side of the things, if you're arriving early, you have to remember it might be hard to find temporary housing. So for all of our August admits, if you're coming for the August fall semester, the earliest you can arrive is, I believe, July 17th, which is 30 days before our report date of August 16th. And August 16th is a full week before classes start. We use August 16th because that allows people to arrive on time for the graduate teaching assistantship workshops and the graduate schools orientation and for individual school orientations within departments. So we use that week to allow people to get here early and get settled in and attend orientations, knowing that classes begin on August 23rd. Again, the earliest you can arrive is 30 days prior to August 16th. That's July 17th. But what if you arrive on July 17th? If you arrive on July 17th, you have to worry about places to stay. Temporary housing will be an issue. So we're getting into some of the other expenses here shortly. Beyond your flight costs, which again, we have no control over, you have your costs for your shuttle. Now, keeping in mind, the airport closest to Tuscaloosa is Birmingham Shuttlesworth Airport. That's our international airport. But you probably will have to direct through other major airports like Atlanta, New York, Newark, New Jersey, Detroit, LA. One of the big ports of entry is where you're going to first arrive, and then you're going to connect to Birmingham's airport. Once you've connected to Birmingham, it is about 50 miles from campus. So it's about a 1-hour drive, meaning that you'll have to take a shuttle. And the shuttle costs for private transportation is between $60 and $120. So you'll need to plan for that. There are some very great services. And if you go to our transportation section, you'll see links to all the main services where you can pre-book your shuttle service. We do offer some transportation through our office, but remember, we're visa officers, we're not bus drivers. And so, you know, and it's not to say that we don't want to try to make it as easy as possible, but we very literally rent a couple of vans, and for a few days before classes begin, we run shuttles to pick up people from the airport, but we only do one pickup per day because it does take round trip and getting everybody settled. It's like 5 or 6 hours for us to accommodate everybody. So we do that typically on the Sunday and Monday before classes, which this year would be August 20th and August 21st, which for many graduate students is too late. They need to be here even earlier than that. So what I would suggest is keep an eye on your email. We will send out a notice or a message, another welcome message in the month of July to everybody coming in August. And it will include information about that shuttle, but also include information about the other shuttle services for getting here to Tuscaloosa. So in any case, plan for your flights, plan for your shuttle services, and then plan for housing. So the first part is, what if you arrive a little early? You'll need to find temporary housing. That could be a hotel, a local Airbnb, or Verbo, you know, like a small rental place. You could maybe rent a furnished apartment, which can be done by the day or by the week. Those tend to be a little bit more expensive than an actual apartment, but not as expensive as maybe a hotel would be per day. They're not all of them very convenient to campus, but these are the ones that are here in the city and would be able to accommodate you. You would need to book these in advance. These are, you would think, oh, these could be booked last minute. They really can't. Move-in time is a very busy time of year for us. So I would say as soon as you have your itinerary, you may want to start looking at hotel options, at least for your initial day or two, until you can get settled into your apartment, wherever you may eventually land on, and you can figure out the costs accordingly. The costs for temporary housing are going to be some of the more expensive costs that you have. It could run you maybe $300 a week for one of the furnished apartments or more. It could be, $100 or $200 a day for hotels, depending on where you're staying. I say this because it is something that is very much in demand here. Remember, the University of Alabama is nearly 40,000 students, and move-in time for you is the same as move-in time for the other 39,999 students. And many of the freshmen who are 17, 18 years old bring their parents with them to help them move in, and their parents are booking all the hotel rooms in the area. And so it is not unusual for there to be extremely high demand in the month of August for hotels. And in fact, you might find that most of them have already booked up completely. Just take a look and keep in mind. The question that I often get is, what about on-campus temporary housing? That is not available. On-campus housing is extremely limited. We have about 8,500 spaces on campus for students as a whole. And that is really set aside for first-year students, freshmen. And they do not allow temporary housing when we have such a high demand. This year, we have about 10,000 freshmen. So you can already do the math and realize that we are short about 1,500 bed spaces on campus for housing just for our first-year students. We've actually had to rent 2 complete apartment complexes near campus. Like, we've leased that from the apartment complexes so they can serve as basically our dorms nearby campus. And so there really is no temporary housing on campus. It is just not possible. We wish we had that kind of facilities available to be able to offer to our students, but there is too much demand just for the housing that we have right now to be able to offer that. So really, hotels are going to be your only option, outside of communicating maybe with your with international student organizations and trying to connect with current international students who may be able to offer a couch or some place for you to stay temporarily. In which case I would say, look at the International Student Organizations page and maybe connect with your nationality group or one of the organizations that are here on campus and are active, and may potentially be able to give you some temporary accommodations, or at least guide you in helping to identify places to stay. Your other costs, and this is going to be outside of your flights. This is actually going to be a more expensive, potentially upfront cost, and that is your deposits and advanced rent on your apartments. It is very common for your rental places, an apartment, to require you to put a deposit that is equal to at least 1 month of rent. And they may ask for your first and last month of rent be paid up front. What this means is you're paying 3 months of rent before you move into your apartment. So if your apartment is $700 a month, that is $2,100 that you have to pay before you can get your key and move in. And that might not be a furnished apartment. You may be looking at apartments where you'll have to buy your furnishings or find cheap furnishings in the community. So those are some other expenses. We do stress with everybody not to sign a lease before you've seen the apartment. And the reason for that is, I can't tell you the sheer volume of people who sign contracts with apartments and then they get here and they don't like it. It's further away from campus than they thought it would be, or it is not convenient, or maybe it's not as nice as it looked in the pictures, and they want to try to get out of their lease. But when you sign a lease, you're promising to pay that landlord for the entire time listed on the lease. It is a contract, and it is a legally binding contract, and they can take you to court and you will lose that money. So don't sign a lease just because you want to grab an apartment and then think I can change my mind once I get there and shop around. you're stuck in that lease for the entire duration of that contract period. So please be careful. We really strongly advise against signing leases in advance. The only exception really that I would say that off-campus housing or our office would say is if you have somebody you trust who can visually inspect that apartment and maybe take a video for you so that you at least get a good idea and can reassure you a little bit that like, yes, this is worth signing the lease on, then maybe sign the lease, but just realize you are really stuck with that lease for the year. And there's nothing my office or the University of Alabama can do to get you out of that lease. The other expenses to factor with your housing, utility deposits. Your electricity might be included in your apartment rent. Some of them do, some of them don't. You'll need to clarify that. They may also include water and sewer. So these are utility expenses, but you might rent a place where those are handled separately. Your internet is almost always going to be a separate expense, but there are some apartment complexes that provide internet services and maybe even television services like cable services for free with their rent expenses. Garbage and recycling will really kind of depend on where you live. If you live in a smaller like townhome or a smaller house, you may have to pay for those services separately. Most apartment complexes, garbage and recycling are already built into their expenses. They have a receptacle for you to drop off your trash and everything. But there might be multiple services that you have to sign on to. And those things may require their own deposits. You'll have to remember, unless you bring bedding with you, you're probably going to have to buy bedding and utensils and cookware. You'll have to think about places like furniture and buying any major appliances that you might have to buy. Most apartments come with a refrigerator and stove and have all that set up, but they won't necessarily have a shower curtain or they won't have any furnishings. Some of them will be happy to rent those furnishings to you, but that will be at an added expense. And then groceries. I have never moved anywhere in my life, and this is within the US, moving from one city to another, where my upfront expenses for just stocking my fridge, my pantry, wasn't extraordinarily expensive. You're going to spend hundreds of dollars to get all the groceries and everything that you need, and the toiletries and other supplies that you're going to need. And then there's the transportation costs. There are some housing options in town that provide transportation, but they may limit that transportation to only when school is operating, meaning that there are classes in session. So they may not operate those shuttles during the winter break or during the summer months. And those times you'll have to figure out your own transportation needs. So really take a look at that and factor in transportation costs, whether you're purchasing a car or taking public transportation or using ride shares. And our public transportation, while we have it, is somewhat limited. So it's not going to be convenient. Most of our students who say, oh, I'll rely on the bus to get me to campus, then realize, well, the bus schedule might not coincide with my work schedule exactly, or with my class schedule. And so they have to then pay for Uber or Lyft or find other ways to get to campus. So these are other expenses to factor in. Generally speaking, and this is my last slide, really with any major content, so we can open it up to Q&A, is we recommend that you prepare for $2,000 to $4,000 of initial expenses. And I know that seems like an absolute fortune, but if you think of it in the context of your overall estimates for your expenses for the year, this is less than 10%. In fact, that's between probably 3 and 8% of your overall costs for the academic year or the 12-month year. But they're going to all be due upfront when you're making these deposits. So having that money on hand is extremely important. And remember, even if you're on a scholarship or a stipend, and I think, Amanda, you can probably talk to this, your first stipend payment will not come until August 31st. And that very first stipend payment is actually for the time period of August 15th through the end of August, meaning that's a half month payment. So if you have a $1,700 per month stipend, you are not going to receive $1,700. You're going to receive half of that. You're going to receive about $850, and then there will be taxes taken out for things like Social Security tax and everything else. That even if those aren't normally withheld, there's going to still be some taxes taken out. So your stipend payment at the end of August might be closer to $750 or $800. And so that's your first payment. Now your second month's payment in September will be the full amount, but you're not going to have a lot of relief right away. So really and truly, when we say bring $2,000 to $4,000, closer to 4,000 is actually where you're going to be comfortable. If I know that might be a big stretch for a lot of folks to bring that much money, but you will thank yourself later on. And really, that's the last slide. I do want to go back to that original cost estimate and focus here on the summer months. While you do not have to pay for tuition unless you're taking classes or worry about the college fees or health insurance or books or supplies, you still have these monthly expenses, your rent, your utilities, your groceries, and your assistantship may only cover the fall and the spring semester. So one of the things you also need to worry about is, early in the spring semester, starting to secure summer employment on campus, because student visa holders are limited as to where they can work. And on campus is one of the few places that they can work legally. And so you need to be able to factor those costs in and secure on-campus employment for the summer months, or save. Some students will save. They'll take a little bit out of each stipend, as hard as that might be, and just kind of set that aside for the summer months expenses. But you need to start factoring that in and planning in advance, and talking with your home department about summer months for assistantships or summer months for student employment, and then also begin looking at other places on campus. So I'm hoping this gives a big overview. Sade and Trong, I know I've just been going on and on, but at this point I thought we could just really kind of touch on the Q&A and maybe pre-submitted questions, and Sade, Trong, and I can kind of take turns answering some of those questions or chiming in there.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much, Charter. That's a wonderful overview, and it's very greatly appreciated. That's very helpful. So kind of the first question that we've just gotten in the Q&A is, could you touch a little bit on the Crimson Ride bus service? Is it a free service? And they've heard that this is kind of the main approach that students use to get to campus.
And I see that Trong is answering the question in typing in, but yeah, Crimson Ride is fantastic. We've got a great bus system on campus. It's primarily just the campus services. They do have shuttles that run off campus. There's not a lot of them, and it's usually by contract. So, in the city, we have the campus, which is kind of central to Tuscaloosa. And then we have a lot of apartments nearby campus. And some of those apartments will actually contract with the university to have a university bus go to their facilities. And so if you happen to rent from one of those apartments that uses Crimson Ride, it is a very reliable service. And they run within very defined time periods. They're very reliable. They are on schedule. You have an app where you can literally track the location of the bus, just like you would if you were looking at Uber or Lyft, and it's completely free. So it is a fantastic service. You can rely on it around campus, but then when you get deeper into the city, some of the lower cost apartment options might be further away. And one of the things that I think students, I guess the first cultural adjustment is understanding what Americans mean when we talk about time and distance. And so when we discuss, oh, it's only 10 minutes from campus, what we mean is it is 10 minutes in a personal car. And so it realistically is more like 4 or 5 miles from campus, which would be about 12 kilometers or so. And that is not a 10-minute walk. That is a good 2 or 3 hour walk. So it is unrealistic when you hear somebody say, we're only 10 or 15 minutes from campus. When you see those types of ads, look for the words walk, like a 10-minute walk from campus, which there's not that much that's 10 minutes walk from campus, to be honest. It might be 10 minutes from the very edge of campus, but it takes me 10 minutes to cross over to the other side of the quad to where Amanda works. So it's a large university campus. I don't know.
I do have a story to share when I first came to the US as a international a foreigner. So I wanted to go to this place, and I looked it up on Google Map, and the map was indicated that it will be 15 mi from where I was by car. So I thought the MI stood for minutes. So I thought, well, it's 15 minutes by car. I didn't have a car at the time, but I had my bike. So I'm like, well, in 45 minutes, approximately, or an hour, I can bike there. Well, it turns out that I didn't make that far when I realized that, like 45 minutes, I was still nowhere close to the location where I wanted to be. And well, after that, I learned my acronyms, or US acronyms. MI doesn't mean minutes, at least in like that situation. That, like 15 miles was, like close to, I think, 30 kilometers. So it was a very, very long distance. So just to reiterate what the charter said, do your research and making sure that you know how far the housing option is, even though they said 5 minutes, it's not necessarily 5 minutes walking there.
And so I've got,
Go ahead.
sorry, there was a question about the resumption date. So the start date for the university, we begin classes on August 23rd. We gave in your I-20 an August 16th report date, and it should have some notation on there that you're allowed to arrive up to 2 weeks from that date, which is the last day of registration and really the last day of our first week of classes is August 30th. If your visa has not been issued, so the question is whether there can be any delay beyond that. August 30th is the absolute latest timeline that we can allow someone to arrive. If the visa has been issued by that date and the department is willing to work with us, there might be a chance of arriving slightly after that. But if the visa has not been issued by August 30th, it is too late for the fall semester. That is a hard deadline for us. So August 30th, anyone whose visa has not been issued to begin classes in the fall semester, we have to then move into deferrals because we cannot keep it open-ended, because we have no control over how long it's going to take the visa officers to approve that visa. It could be 1 day, it could be another month, it could be 6 months. And keeping that open-ended and having someone registered for classes and just waiting it out is unfortunately not possible. We have to just go ahead and make the decision to move forward, to defer to the next semester. So for those of you who are trying to secure visa appointments, continue to do that. visa appointments are opening up. If your consulate or embassy where you're working allows it, you can request an expedite to have that appointment moved up to an earlier date, in which case, hopefully, you'll be able to secure your visa on time. But for those of you who are still waiting on your visa decision or have not had your appointment by August 30th, there will be no negotiation about this. There's no chance of this. We will have to defer. And it is very unfortunate, but it is the way we have to operate on that.
So one of the questions that was pre-submitted, and I felt like this was a really good question. They asked, how is rent supposed to be paid? And do you just set a date for rent, or is it a set date by your landlord?
It's a good question. Sade, we haven't given you a chance to talk very much. Do you want to talk on that at all? Oh, you're muted.
Okay, what was the question about the rent?
So they want to know, how do you pay rent? And is it a date that you set to pay your rent, or is it set by your landlord or whoever owns the property?
Typically, when you pay your rent, it is something that is set by your actual landlord or whatever apartment complex or place that you're staying at. It's not a date that you can set yourself. I know that there may be situations at times where you may get some type of financial hardship and you may need a little extra time, but still you would need to speak with whatever apartment or place that you're staying at to have those things worked out. But that's the best answer that I can give for that one.
Great, that's helpful. Thank you. There are several other Q&As. One of them about registering for courses. I'll go ahead and answer that one. To register for courses, you have to first establish your MyBama account, which if you have gotten your I-20, you have done so already, or you should have done so already. And then you need to reach out to your department. They handle registration. You can register through your MyBama account, and there is also a information available on our website and in your admission letter that tells you how to follow that process. You will be able to register with them, but as far as what classes you should take, that's something that your department will need to let you know.
Amanda, I see a lot of people are still asking the question that you mentioned earlier about, can they get recordings? You will be able to get recordings of this live session as well.
Yes, you will be able to get copies of our recordings. So one of them, and I think you may have already touched on this, one of the pre-submitted questions was their interview date is not till the 20th of September, and what's the latest resumption date that they could begin? So I think we've already touched on that.
And we did, and just to repeat, and I know it sounds very cold that we wouldn't be flexible, but it's more owing to the type of schedule that we have here at the University of Alabama and our academic timelines. But August 30th, if a visa has not been issued by August 30th, we have to look at deferrals from the fall semester to a future semester. And just to add to that, if you do only find September or later visa appointments, what we really stress is book the earliest visa appointment. It might be in 2024. We've been dealing with this for years through the pandemic, where, and even prior to the pandemic, where the earliest visa appointment is way out in the future. You book that earliest appointment, and there's usually an expedite option with the embassy where you can show that your F1 start date is in August, and they'll move that up to a much earlier date and slot you in. But you have to have an appointment first before you can expedite that appointment. And some embassies, like India right now, and the consulates and embassies in India, they are opening so many slots, so much that you're able to now book you just find a much earlier appointment. So, and I'm expecting a lot of the larger countries will be doing the same thing through their U.S. embassies and consulates. So just keep checking follow that U.S. Embassy's social media, because they'll usually announce these things like, we're going to be doing Super Fridays for the rest of July. And it's all it is student visa appointments all day long. And they do thousands of them every Friday. So these things will help greatly. But book that appointment and then follow the steps on the U.S. Embassy or U.S. Consulate's website to expedite that appointment to an earlier date. And usually they will work with you on this. This is a priority for them. So even though it's been booked up, they will move things around usually to help people out.
I'm going to take a second here to introduce Caitlin Beard, who's our Director of Recruitment here at UA. She's been able to join us now, and I'm going to hop off shortly. And I also wanted to throw out one more question before I went that was from the pre-submitted, that was about work opportunities. Where can students work? What options are available to them? And does that change during the summer?
Trong, do you want to touch on this, or Sharday?
Let's see. You want to go, Trong, or you want to split it up?
Yeah, well, sure, I can take it. So I can speak about, student eligibility to work on and off campus. Now, students who are on F1 visa are allowed to work on campus for up to 20 hours per week during spring and fall semesters. You can work as an F1 student, you can work more than 20 hours per week on campus during summertime. Now, for those who have a 0.5 GA, that is equivalent to 20 hours per week already. So if you have been offered a 0.5 GA, it means that you've already maximized like the number of hours that you can work during fall and spring. Now in the summer, you can work more than 20 hours, so you can still have the GA and work on campus. But, if school is in session, 20 hours, it's the cap. If you have multiple on-campus employment, all of them combined cannot be more than 20 hours per week. Now, there are also options for curricular practical training or optional practical training where you can work off campus in a position that is directly related to your major. You have to enroll in at least 2 full academic semesters before you're eligible for those. And there are some other criteria or conditions that must be met. But that are options. Like, say, if you find internship that aligns with your major, with your program, we can look into those options and potentially authorize OPT or CPT. Now, well, that is as far as like whether you can work. As far as job opportunities, I know that we do have work on campus that are open during summer and academic semesters. We do have a website that posts jobs that are available. I believe it's called jobs.ua.edu. And you can click on the student tab, and it will filter out all of the other jobs that are not student job. But make sure that you only choose on-campus job, because those are the jobs that you're eligible for. As for off-campus jobs, we do have Career Center who can help you with, let's say, brush up your resume, connecting you with potential employers. We also have career fairs every semester, several of them each semesters, where you can explore job opportunities and connect with prospective employers. But yeah, we do have resources that you can get jobs, and our office is here to help you if you need the work authorization. If you find the job and you need work authorization, we can help you with that as well.
Another good thing about it too is when you come on campus, our office has walk-in advising, on-call advising Monday through Thursday. So don't ever feel like, you know, you're not able to just come over and talk with somebody. There's someone always on call from 11 to 3 o'clock Monday through Thursday that you can talk or make an appointment with if you have any type of difficult questions or just any type of concerns. And I think Charter's typing an answer. I was going to touch bases on that. What can ISIS do? Did you want to give the answer or you want to talk about it live? Oh, you're muted.
Now I'm muted myself. Yeah, sure. And y'all probably been hearing me clicking away here. I didn't realize my mic had been on the whole time. So with a visa denial, it really depends on what the visa denial was for. So they're all very different reasons for visa denials, and visa interviews are sometimes very frustrating. You know, you can go into it, you know, prepared for one type of visa interview, and then you meet with a visa officer who asks questions that you've not prepared for. The important thing is to be as prepared as possible for the visa interview. And if you are denied and you reach out to us, there's not a lot that our office can do to override. All we can do is recommend you to, well, first ask, did they give you a sheet or some sort of documentation showing why you were denied? And it will usually have either a checkbox next to a visa denial reason or it will be handwritten. The most common reason we see is a 214B denial, and that is for failure to prove your non-immigrant intent. I can't tell you that is the 100% most common visa denial. So you'll go in there and you may not know this, but you may say something that indicates to the visa officer that your intention is to ultimately immigrate to the United States, or that you're not going to return to your residence abroad, or that you're going to abandon your home abroad. And it can be done unintentionally, but you have to also remember US law requires that a visa officer assumes that you're going to try to immigrate to the US. So you're actively trying to prove to them that you will not. And it needs to be truthful. It needs to be actually real, that your overall plans, you may not know what you have ready for your life plan, but typically a visa officer is going to expect a graduate student to have their life pretty well mapped out. An undergraduate student who's coming at 17 or 18 years old to begin a bachelor's degree doesn't know what they're going to do yet. They may change their major 3 times. In fact, the first 2 years, they're just taking basic classes. But a graduate student is going into a specialization, and they want to hear that you understand how that fits your overall career plan, why you chose that specialty to begin with. Maybe that's your undergraduate background, or maybe it's where you want to go with your career in the future, and they want to know how that's going to play into your plans after you return home. And so they're looking for a little bit more substance in your answers. And if you don't provide that, lack of that information is to them the same thing as failure to prove non-immigrant intent. So if you don't touch on it, and the common thing that I hear from most visa applicants is, but they didn't ask me. It's not their job to ask, actually. It's your job to prove it. And so I did drop a link, but if you go to the same page where we have the how to get your I-20, how to apply for a visa, there is in there a top 10, or 10 reminders of things to remember when you go into the visa interview. And one of the very first thing is to establish those ties to the home country. And so that's the most common reason. Less common reasons of denial, we see sometimes 221G denials. This might be for Really and truly, it's typically administrative processing. It's not really a denial. It's just a refusal to issue until they can get the clearances. And so some people will see that refusal and think they've been denied, and they haven't been denied. It's just been sent to administrative processing. Now that might possibly get ultimately denied. Those are harder to overcome. For the ones that are denied for failure to establish non-immigrant intent, what we would say is, prepare to apply again. They will probably not be able to expedite your visa appointment a second time. So you may really truly have to defer your admission. But go in better prepared to address those questions and to be truthful about it. That's the biggest thing that I have to say. Remember that every visa officer in the world has access to the notes from any previous visa interview. So if you've ever done a visa interview and you go back and you're saying exactly the opposite of what you said before, they will catch you in a lie unless you can explain logically why this situation is different now. And it could be a completely different situation. So you just need to be honest in what you say and to have the documentation to back it up. Anyway, long answer to a simple question. What can we do to help? It's really just to kind of point you to your resources and set your expectations for what you need to do. We can work with you to defer your I-20, but you'll need to work with the graduate school and your academic department to make sure that they are still willing to wait another semester or maybe even another academic year until you're able to arrive. And that's a bigger question. But we can't intervene with the embassy. That's not, unfortunately, something where we can really have much to bear on that. We can just kind of point you to those resources to prep.
So I'm hopping on at the last minute. I wasn't able to thank Amanda, so we'll thank her when she gets back. We did a little swap there. But I just wanted to remind everyone that we are going to be wrapping up at 10. So if you have a last minute question, go ahead and submit that in the chat. We'll answer one or two more. But this is your last chance to submit any other questions. I will send our email in the chat as well. If there's any questions that we weren't able to get to, please email us. You can also reach out to Charter's team. And our next session for our international newly admitted students is going to be in July 11th. We're going to have a panel of current international students talking about things that, help prepare them, things that they wish they would have known before arriving, just some last minute tips, what to pack, what you should wait and just buy here. Different things like that, just to help you really get ready to arrive on campus within the next month or so from that session. So if you happen to be someone who has not been admitted yet, you're just here asking questions and learning things, that's great. We do have sessions just for our applicants, prospective students who are looking into applying. We have those every month. So please sign up for one of those if you really want to get into the details of applying and what that looks like, what departments are looking for and statements of purpose and things like that. We really get into that on those sessions for our applicants. With this fan, sorry. So we did have a question submitted that asked about if you haven't gotten feedback yet on an assistantship, what would you advise them do? Do you keep waiting for feedback, or is there a better choice? If you want to answer that, or I can answer that. It doesn't.
I think I defer to you on this one, Caitlin, because it's more in your wheelhouse.
Yeah, for sure. I will say that since it is already June, most assistantships and funding opportunities have already been offered. I will say, that doesn't mean there's not any left. Sometimes students will accept assistantships or a fellowship or something, and then something happens. They may have accepted an assistantship and they may be in a similar position to some of you, and their visa doesn't come through and they do end up having to defer. Well, that means that position comes open. And so I would really, think about that. If you've been in contact with the program director and they've told you, oh, we're still waiting to see how many funding lines we have, it may be worth waiting. But if you haven't really been in contact with them, you haven't heard anything, you've been trying to reach out, you haven't been told anything, chances of you getting funding for the fall, unfortunately, are very slim. I'm not saying it's impossible, but just to be realistic with you, the chances of getting funding in time, getting all of your documents in, getting that process, chances are very slim to get here. I mean, really in 2 months, classes will be starting in a little over 2 months. And so what I would recommend you doing is going ahead and starting that deferral process. You can reach out to us. We can help you through that, talk with your department about possibly deferring to spring of 24 or even fall of 24. And then if you've already started your process with charter and them, then with your I-20 and stuff, then they can help you with that. But I personally would recommend going ahead and starting that deferral process if you haven't received funding yet. Did y'all want to add to that?
No, I think that everything you said is absolutely accurate. And I don't want to discourage folks from this. And we always do see last minute funding, but it's individual. Like out of the 1,000+ new admit grad students who are coming to start class in the fall semester, it is individual, opportunities in some departments that might come up, and then because of last minute decisions by someone else who has decided to go somewhere else, and so they look at their pool of candidates and their, the people that are on the wait list. But I would not expect any last minute things. Just keep in contact with your department on that. And hopefully it comes through. We do have some students who will attempt to defer, hoping to be considered for future terms, but it won't necessarily put you at the front of the line necessarily. You're just basically putting yourself in the pool with everybody else. And so they're going to look at the same things again. And it may be that you're put on a wait list another time. And so that's where we are. There's a couple of questions in there, and I know we're getting really close. What kind of tuition waivers are available? Those are typically tied to assistantships and fellowships. So if you're receiving a graduate teaching or research assistantship or a fellowship, it typically will include at least either a partial or full tuition waiver. In that there are not separate tuition waivers that I'm aware of. There are some scholarships, and that is a scholarship. It's not a waiver. Mm-hmm. And finally, what can cause a delay for getting an I-20? It depends on what you've submitted. So the delay could be, what you've submitted is just not complete. We are at peak processing time right now. We are trying to get everything done in the 5 business days we promised. We always want to remind people that's 1 week. So if you submit it on a Sunday, we're looking at, we won't have it ready until not that Friday, but probably the Monday following the next Sunday. So give it 1 week from whatever time that you've submitted, and at a minimum. But if you've only submitted partial documents, if it's not complete, if you haven't uploaded everything, if that could be one reason for a delay. Another reason for a delay may be more technical, and this is something beyond your control, but it may be something where the UA systems, from admissions to the UA systems and then feeding into our system for creation of the I-20s, that there's something that is not quite feeding over properly. We regularly have to run troubleshooting with IT, with the registrar's office and the graduate school whenever we find an error. And so that's completely beyond the student's control. It's actually beyond our control as well. We have to work those things out to get that data feed properly coming over, so that we can actually create the I-20, because everything that's in the I-20 is based off of what's officially in the university system. And so if there's an error there, and there are, I will say we troubleshoot on a daily basis for errors in our reports, so that we can get these things feeding correctly. But if there's an error, that will delay things by sometimes several days. It can take sometimes weeks to fix that. And if you're a deferral, that's where I need to stress this in our timeline for processing things. If you're doing a deferral for an initial application, you're a first-time applicant, typically 1 week is all we need to process the I-20. But when you defer your admissions, you have to factor in The graduate school has to make its decision to defer. You have to be formally admitted. We have to clean up records that have your old term of admission in there before everything feeds over to us with your new term of admission. That can take 2 weeks by itself. And then we can begin working on the I-20. So you might submit your documents, and it's not that we don't want to process it. It's literally we're waiting for all the systems to catch up to the new term of admission. And so that could very much take several weeks. So deferrals will almost always be a 2 to 3 week process, whereas new admits, it's about a 1 week process from the time of admission decision and submission of all the documents.
It looks like we are out of time. There was one more question submitted. I'm assuming that you're referring to a background check for an assistantship or something like that. On my end, personally, I would say about a week or so. Give it time. Sometimes it takes some process. Or even me personally with my background check, there was some glitches, and I'm a full staff employee, and it took almost a week to hear back about that. And I was sweating. I was like, what have I done? But definitely give it a week, especially right here. This is peak time for getting a lot of those in. If you haven't heard back in over a week, I would follow up, but give it some time. I don't know if you guys have some insight.
I know that whenever it's like there's certain jurisdictions like Northport, which is shares a border with Tuscaloosa, it takes 2 weeks for anybody who resides within Northport. And really and truly, those background checks, they're making contact with the police agencies in your home country. So sometimes that can be the delay if it takes them a while to get some sort of report back. They're checking multiple databases. So those background checks can sometimes take a few weeks, but they typically clear up. I don't know that the employee is notified. Trung, you recently went through this process. Sade, you did too. Do you remember if did you get a notification after it had cleared?
I don't think
I did
so.
not. I don't remember getting one.
Well, I did get the notification when they initiated or started the background check, but I didn't get notification when it was completed.
Yeah, I think it's only the employer, so the hiring department, that gets that notification. So and which is kind of frustrating because you submitted all this stuff to like give permission for them to do the background check, and then you never hear anything. They'll get it cleared up before you can start your job. So
yeah, for sure. Well, if that is everything, I just want to thank you guys so much for hopping on, and everyone with the swap with Amanda and I. We've got a few events going on across campus, so we're swapping out. But I want to thank everyone again. If you are an admitted student who is coming in August, please register. I sent a link to the portal with the upcoming session in July. If you're an applicant who is hoping to apply, we have an upcoming session just for applicants. And then if you happen to be someone who is being admitted for spring or even possibly deferring to next fall, we're going to have more sessions scheduled out for the next year, hoping to get those up in the next week or so, so people can start registering for those. But thank you guys so much. We're looking forward to having you on campus. Please reach out if we can help you in any way. But thanks again, and roll Tide.
roll Tide.
Goodbye.